First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to the yeshiva. Thank you to the Rosh Yeshiva. Thank you to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Talbis, for helping set this up. Here's what I would like to do. As you know, I'm sure you all know, Yeshiva University is a place where Tcheles has been spoken about and written about for really over 30 years. The book that came out with the articles by the Rosh Yeshiva, by Rabbi Lim, I think it's 30 years old already. So, but I want to focus, really laser focus on a very, very specific topic. The topic in general of Tcheles, you could go on and on and on for many, you learn the sugyas all over Shas, and that's just really scratching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to talking about Tcheles. Of course, the first issue is, what are we talking about? Is it real Tchelet? Isn't it real Tchelet? Does it come from a snail? What snail? Does it come from a squid? Is the snail correct? Is it not correct? And 100 other questions. What I said to the Rosh Yeshiva just a little while ago, there's a Nobel Prize winning chemist, Roald Hoffman, who spoke often about Tchelet and has written about Tchelet a number of times. He's a dye chemist. Anybody here who's taking advanced chemistry probably has come across the Hoffman equations. That's Roald Hoffman. And when he was talking about the topic of Tchelet, he started by saying like this: there is not one scientist alive today that does not believe that the Murex trunculus snail is the source of ancient Tchelet. Now, whether or not that's true, and whether or not it's true that the Murex is the source of Tchelet, to me at least, that's an umdana that creates at least a suffix, I think. If you've got the number one chemist in the world telling you that all scientists believe something, then I think to many people, not to all people, but to many people, that already creates a halachic reality that this is something that has to be taken seriously, and that's not what we're going to talk about today. What I hope that you'll do with me today is make a suspension of that question. Assume for now that the Murex trunculus snail is the source, the chilazon, the source of ancient Tchelet. I'm going to ask you to make another assumption, which is that the process that we use, and I'm going to go into it in great detail, but the process that we use is going to get to more or less the same place that they would have gotten to in the ancient world. And again, that's an assumption that will be challenged and could be challenged. But the reason why I want to do that is because we won't be able to move forward with the sugya of Marasheni and with the dyeing in general unless we try to do the dyeing. And if we try to do the dyeing, we have to use a method. And the method that I'd like to use, instead of using Pliny the Elder's method of having urine and soda ash and salt and putting it on a simmer for 2 weeks or so on a low flame, instead of doing that, I'd like to use the methods that we use, which use more efficient methods, and we'll talk about that, but we're not going to get anywhere if we have to be here for 2 weeks. So that's what I would like to do, and I'll tell you my program for how I'm going to structure the shiur. The first thing I'd like to do is to do the dyeing together with you. That's the first part of the Gemara that we're going to be talking about, the Gemara Menachos, is how to do the dyeing. The second part of the shiur will be how do you do Marasheni, and that we'll look at the second part of the Gemara, which is the whole sugya of Marasheni. After that, I'd like to understand, in light of what we'll see, how can we understand the different shitot in what's the psul of Marasheni. Tosfot on the one hand, Tosfot and the Rambam might say on the one hand, Rashi on the other hand, to show the issues or the challenges in understanding different shitot. And then I hope to give an explanation, if you will, my own ideas about how we might be able to answer some of the challenges to some of the shitot. But then comes, I think, a very, very important part. Over the last 2 or 3 years, really, there have been things that we've learned physically, mitzius. When you understand the mitzius of what is true and look back at the sugya of Marasheni, you can come to some conclusions that I hope will put to rest, or at least allow us to attempt to approach some of the questions that have come up over the last 2 or 3 years, specifically regarding the color of tcheles. For anybody here who knows the periodical, I don't know if anybody gets it here, Tradition. A couple of years back, there was an article by Professor Tzvi Koren who made some claims about the color of tchelet. There was back and forth in Tchumen, in the last issue of Tchumen, again about issues of the color of tchelet. There's a lot of questions going around on a chabura in Lakewood about the color of tchelet. Rav Buchwald from Bnei Brak had an article claiming questions and issues about what we do and what happens with the color of tcheles. And I think that the answers to these questions can be found by a mixture of understanding the mitzius together with a good, clear understanding of the sugya, and that's why I think the sugya is so important. And therefore, I think that we can get right to it. If everybody has a Mara Mekomos, we're going to start with the Gemara, Menachos, Daf Membeis Ambeis, Amar Abaye Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. How do you make tcheles? So Abaye is asking Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, how do you make tcheles? So question number 1, why doesn't Abaye know how to make tcheles? Why does he have to ask Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda how to make tcheles? Shmuel Bar Yehuda, I'm sure, is a great Talmud Chacham, but Abaye is also a great Talmud Chacham. So why doesn't Abaye know how to make tcheles? Our snail, the chilazon, the Gemara talks about it. Where does the chilazon live? Yisulamot Tzor Ve'ad Haifa, along the northern coast of the Mediterranean. And actually, the Torah already says Tanakh, tcheles me'iyei Elisha, which is probably Cyprus or Greece. Tcheles comes from all over the Mediterranean. Luz, question about where Luz is, but Luz could have been someplace in Turkey. So all of these things tell us that tchelet came from the shores of the Mediterranean. It's a sea snail, we believe, that lives in the Mediterranean. The Rambam himself says b'yam hamelach umatzui, but he doesn't mean the Yam HaMelach, what we call the Yam HaMelach. The Rambam calls the salty sea, the Mediterranean, the Yam HaMelach. So in the ocean, the snail lives. Where does Abaye live? You can answer. In Bavel. Bavel is 1,000 kilometers or more from the coast. So Abaye doesn't know how to make tchelet. Who does know how to make tchelet? The nechute, the people who come from Eretz Yisrael with Torah Rav Yochanan. They come from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and they're the ones who know how to make tchelet. So Abaye asks him, how do I make tchelet? How do you over there make tchelet? Okay. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda answers like this. Maitinan dam chilazon. The first thing you need is the essence, dam. We don't believe that it means actually from the circulatory system. A snail doesn't have a separate circulatory system, but it's some kind of a paste or a liquid that comes out of the snail. Dam. Tosfos says dam mifkad pocket, so even Tosfos already doesn't hold that it's a normal blood. Okay. On the back of the snail, this is not the snail, this is just the shell of the snail. Inside the shell, there's a little worm that lives. On the back of the worm, there's a tiny little yellow gland, and that's what we use to take out the dye. When you take it out, it starts off kind of a yellowish color, but after a few seconds, it turns a very, very, very dark, deep purple. Now, we take that gland from many, many, many snails. We put them in a blender, and then we get this paste, which is like a kind of a very, very dark, like almost looks like grape jelly, right? And then you take that and you put it on a plata shel Shabbat, hot plate, and you leave that for a couple of days, and it turns hard, like a cake, even harder. And you put that in a coffee grinder, and that's what we have here. So this is that, by the way, stays forever. You don't have to refrigerate it. You don't have to do anything with it. Yaakov, would you get me some? Where is it? Over there? Those? Oh, thank you very much. So, okay. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to take mushed snail glands that were dried out and powderized, instant tchelet. A little bit of hot water. And so far, we've done exactly what Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda asked us to do. We've taken dam chilazon. How does it continue? Dam chilazon samanim, hold on to that for a second. Raminon lahu biyora, you take them all and put them in a yora. The yora is the vat or the beaker, right? Martachinan lo, that's also the girsa that we have, and you boil it up. Okay, so you have hot water and our instant tchelet. Now, if you'll notice in a few seconds, the tchelet is going to, or the dye, or whatever you want to call it, the molecules that come out of the snail are going to precipitate down to the bottom. They don't mix with water, which is a good thing in a dye. Tchelet at one point was worth 20 times its weight in gold. Just that you know, from last week's parsha, the me'il weighs about, we have a me'il, we made a me'il, 2.5 kilo. 2.5 kilo times 20 times its weight in gold. We did the math. It comes out to be anywhere between $4 to $6 million for the me'il of the Kohen Gadol. So even if the Beis HaMikdash got a 10% discount, it's still extremely expensive to have the me'il. You can imagine. A little bit of blood gets spritzed on the me'il. The big gadim of the Kohen Gadol, you have to throw away. You can't, not throw away, but the nignaz, you don't clean them. So you have to be careful. That's why Kohanim Rizrizim. So if you had a $2.5 million me'il, then and it rained and it washed out, that would be a big problem, a big problem for the Beis HaMikdash. It'd be a big problem for everybody. And tchelet was something that was available to everybody in the world. That's an important point to make. This is Rav Herzog's big chiddush. Rav Herzog, who wrote his doctorate on tchelet, one of his major chidushim is that the tchelet of the rest of the world is the same tchelet as the Jews had. If you accept that, then a lot of things become permissible to look at. If you believe that the Romans were using tchelet, for example, then you can look at archaeology. You could look at Roman sources. You could look at what the Romans called their snails. You could look at all of these different things, and it would be mutter to look at them. It would be acceptable. If you don't believe that, then the only evidence you could ever look for is in the Beis Medrash. You can only look for Sfarim. The minute that you say that the tchelet of the rest of the world was the same as the tchelet of the Jews, then it opens up the walls of the Beis Medrash. You can have a lot more to look at and a lot more to think about. But in any event, from the time of the Gemara, the Romans knew this as well. I'm going to make the assumption that what the Romans write about their snail dyeing is the same as what we know about our snail dyeing in the Gemara. You have to have something else. And right away we see that in the words that I skipped, v'samanim. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda knows you have to add chemicals. You have to add chemicals or else the dye is not going to work. It's not going to work. Does anybody here take chemistry? Oh, fair. So most dyes need a glue to get them to stick to the fabric, right? To the wool. These dyes are extremely, extremely unique in that they don't need anything, any glue, which is in dye language, it's called a mordant. They don't need a mordant to connect between the dye, because again, usually the dye is something that doesn't wash out. It doesn't wash out, it doesn't bond to water, right? So in order to get it to bond to the wool or to the cotton, you use some sort of an in-between. Our dyes don't need that, but they do need chemicals. What we're going to do is to put them into a state where we can allow them to dissolve in water. We're going to then introduce them to the fibers of the wool. And then we're going to trick them back so that they once again are not water soluble, so that they won't wash out. This again, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda knew this, and he talks about it, samanim. What Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda doesn't do is give us details. Chaval. If Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda gave us more details, which samanim? Give us a little more information. Even the information that we have about the chilazon is so difficult, so cryptic, so hard to understand. Chaval. And maybe it's a thing, if you're going to write a book that is going to be studied 1,500 years later in a different context altogether, use more words, not less words. So what we're going to add now is a chemical, and again, this is the chemicals that we use. It's a chemical, more or less the same chemical that you would use to open up your clogged drain. In the times of the Torah, in the times of the Tanakh, in the times of the Gemara, this was called neter. Neter is detergent, right? Even in the I forget where it is, in Yechezkel, in Yirmiyahu, talks about neter. And certainly in the Gemara, indeed, all over the place you have neter. We use that to change the pH, the acidity of the liquid, so that the next chemical will work. And the next chemical is called sodium dithionite. So usually when I give a shiur like this, I say, how does the Gemara call sodium dithionite? And there's resounding silence, because of course the Gemara would never have known about sodium dithionite. It was just invented less than 100 years ago, which brings about the next question, of course. If that's the case, then what did they do in the times of the Gemara? And I already told you, what the Roman recipe is a little bit of wood ash, a little bit of urine, a little bit of salt. For our purposes, less important. What I can tell you is it can be done in a natural method. And for those who don't believe me, you can look on YouTube and put in the words for the search, the worst job in history. There's a BBC series where they go through the worst jobs in history. And one of the episodes features a man by the name of John Edmonds. And John Edmonds, who was a retired engineer, and spent his retirement showing how kids at a children's museum, teaching them how to do natural dyeing of indigo. About 30 years ago, we got in touch with John Edmonds when we read about him and the fact that he was an expert in dyeing indigo, which of course is indigo, Kollel, right? So Kollel, which is very similar to Tcheilet in its look, but also in the way it interacts as a dye. So we asked him if he could help us figure out how to do natural dyeing with snails, not just with plant indigo. And he did, and he helped us, and he actually was the first to show, he read Pliny in the original Latin, and was able to try to follow along with Pliny's explanations, his recipe, and he was able to do that. That was very, very crucial, because there were Rabbanim, I mentioned to the Rosh Hashiva of Rabinovitz, who felt that first you needed to prove that you could dye tcheles with the snail in ways that were available in the ancient world. Once you prove that, then you could use modern methods. But that was very, very, very important for us. So John Edmonds who unfortunately passed away at a young age, he was able to show us what we were doing and how to do that. And that is, I don't know how Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda did his dyeing. I don't know what recipe, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. We know now of at least 7 different ways to make tchelet. Some of them were available to the ancients. Some of them weren't available to the ancients. But all of the results are the same, and that's very, very important, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The last chemical that I'm adding is a chemical that, notice, by the way, you see what's going on here? What color do I have? This is not tchelet. This is a greenish yellow color. For those chemists, what we've done is we've reduced the solution. It's gone into reduction. The detail is not so important. But for our purposes, the dye molecules are starting to dissolve in water, but they change color. And we believe that this is crucial for understanding the sugya. Because in a moment, we're going to see that you have to do something called te'ima, tasting or testing the vat to see if it's ready or not. And the question that everybody who was learning the sugya for the last 1,300 years would ask, how come you can't just look at the solution to see if it's ready or not? And the answer is, because in this state, you don't have information about what's going on inside the dye. What I'm going to do here is a little bit of a trick, because I don't have much sunlight outside. Okay, what I'm doing here now is the important discovery that happened in 1985, which allowed tcheles to be rediscovered. For 1,300 years, as I mentioned, probably at least since the great wars between the Byzantine Romans and the Persians and the Muslims in the 7th century, all centered around Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael. Terrible, terrible, terrible times for Eretz Yisrael, for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Many of the minhagim were destroyed. The Gaonim afterwards are very suspect about the traditions of Eretz Yisrael, all because of this period of time. World War for 30 years that took place in Eretz Yisrael, and the 3 superpowers all wanted control of the world and all hated the Jews. So it was not a good time. That's when Rav Herzog believes in that time period is when tchelet was lost. By the time of the Tanchuma, a few 50, 80 years later, 100 years later, by the time of the Tanchuma, ve'achshav ein lanu el lavan she'atchelet nignaz. At this point already in time of Tanchuma, we don't have tcheles anymore. The Rambam says zehar beishanim that we don't have tcheles and nobody knows how to make tcheles. Why did it take so long to be rediscovered? Because everyone who tried to look into the topic had 3 sentences or statements that they believed to be true. Number 1, that the murex was the source of the tchelet, and already 200 years there are people that are discussing this, and even the Tiferes Yisrael speaks about the fact that it's a sea snail, that it comes from a sea snail. The other fact that everyone believed is that these sea snails can only produce a purple color. On the other hand, on the third hand, tchelet is what color? At least for now, let's assume. What color is tchelet? Sky blue. Okay, again, you'll argue with me about that later, but sky blue. So, tchelet is sky blue. This is purple. This is a source of tchelet. We have a problem there. One of those things is not true. And what the scholars believed is that the tradition of the Jews is not true. You say that it's blue. Maybe it's not. Maybe blue, purple, whatever. What's the difference? The Radziner Rebbe held that if the only dye that can come from a snail is purple, or red, as he calls it, adom, he says, chas v'shalom, we should listen to the milumadim, the scholars that tell you that tchelet was purple or red. Instead, he went and looked for a different source of the tchelet and found a different chilazon. But about 40 years ago, in 1985, Professor Otto Elsner found that if you expose the dye at this very, 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 very specific time, when it's in this solution, when it's reduced, if you expose it to very strong light or sunlight, you're going to change the purple into blue. How that happens chemically, why that happens, is that good, is it kosher, is it bad? Not for now. What I'm going to do now is dye a piece of wool in our vat. From now on, everything that I've done up until now doesn't need any kavana, lishma. I think that's the halacha. I think everybody will agree with me. Rosh Hashiva will agree that preparing the vat does not need kavana lishma. From the time of the dipping of the wool, from the time of the tzviya of the dipping, you need it. So I'm going to say l'shem mitzvat tzitzit, and I'm going to dip this wool into our dye. And I'm only going to leave it in for a few seconds. Let it soak up the dye nicely. Yafeh. Okay. Now, when I take it out, the opposite of reduction is oxidation. So we're going to allow this to oxidize in the air. And as everybody can see, slowly, slowly, we should be getting a nice blue color. If my flashlight worked, then what we should be getting is blue and not purple. Okay. Tcheles. Everybody would agree that this is, again, everybody would agree, suspending all the other questions that you'll have. Everybody would agree that this is tcheles, color of the sky. Tcheles dome liyam, yam dome lirakia, rakia dome likisei hakavod, and this is going to be very beautiful tcheles. Now I'm going to dip another new piece of wool into the dye. I'm going to say l'shem mitzvat tzitzit on this as well. Shem mitzvat tzitzit. Now let's look at the rest of the Gemara. Okay, let's follow along with the rest of the Gemara. We've done our dyeing. V'shakilnan porta bebeita. Now you take some of the liquid out and you pour it into an eggshell. An eggshell is the ancient equivalent of a paper cup, because you can throw it away. It's a chad pa'ami cup. V'ta'aminan lehu be'udra. And we test it. Ta'aminan doesn't mean to taste it, although there are dyers that actually do taste the dye, but that's not what we're talking about. We taste it, we test it with a little piece of wool. Okay, why do we test it? Because like I said, you don't know what's going on in here until you do the dyeing and you oxidize it, and then you can see what's going on with the dye. So that's a pashup shot in the Gemara. So we test it. Then we throw away that eggshell and the small amount of dye liquid that's in it. And we burn the wool. Okay? Shmami notrat. Now we can learn three things from this. Shmami nati'ima psula. We learn from this that when you dye for the sake of te'ima, of testing, the wool is pasul for tcheles. That's why. How do we learn that out from what we just said? Because I burn the wool. Why do I burn the wool? So that nobody should chas v'shalom use it afterwards for tcheles shel mitzvah. So I burn the wool. From the fact that I burn the wool and I don't use the wool, I don't collect all these little scraps and make tzitzis out of it, that shows me that te'ima psula, that what I tested, what I used to test, the wool that I used to test, is not acceptable. It's pasul for tzitzis. Number one. The second thing I learned from this is that I need to have, like I said, you need to dip the wool with the right kavana. Te'ima pasla, or probably the girsa that should be there is ta'ama pasla. If I did, why do I do this in an eggshell? What's going on here with the eggshell and the paper cup? Why don't I just take a little piece of wool and dip it right into the yora, right? Like I could do right in here. I could take it and I could test it. I could see, is it working? Is it not working? If it's working, I'll dip the rest of my wool. Why am I not allowed to do that? Ta'ama pasla. If you dipped for the sake of te'ima, of testing, into the vat, the whole vat becomes pasul. So then the Gemara says, it's really the same thing, the first two, right? Because why? And the Gemara answers, you're right. Inachinami, they are really not three things, they're two things. Shema mina, from this, it's the Gemara asks, why do I have to throw away? Why do I have to burn the wool? Because we said it's puzzle. But why is it puzzle? Because it wasn't done lishma. It was done l'shem testing. So therefore, the Gemara says, yes, they're really the same thing. And it's, yeah, it's true. It is one thing, but it's telling you why. Very nice. All of this kitnai. This is all a machlokes. The machlokes te'ima psula mishum shenemar klil techeles divrei Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel is the one who holds that you're not allowed to dip twice. Rabbi Yochanan ben Davai omer afilu marasheni sheba kosher. Yochanan ben Davai argues with Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. These are two Tanoim, and he says no, you can dip even two times. Mishum shenemar ushni tolat. Instead of, he's making a word play. Instead of ushni tolat, call it usheni, second. So just like by tolas shani, the word sheni, somehow or another, a little bit difficult to understand exactly what his limud is. Okay, very, very good. Let's look at Rashi. When Rashi says, according to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, what's the pasuk that he learns out that you're not allowed to do marasheni? Kol techeles ba'inon. You need all of the techeles. Sheyehe kol ikar mara achilazon b'tzemer. You need all of the ikar, everything of the mara of the chilazon that has to get into the tzemer. Shelo yehe davar acher tzavua ba mitchilata. Now, we'll take a little bit of a break, and let's see how our marasheni came out. Everybody agree that this was marasheni according to what we just learned? According to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, according to Rashi, this would be very, very puzzle. According to Rav Yochanan ben Davai, this would be okay. Now, what do you expect to see if Rashi, just the Pashup Pshat of Rashi, Pashup Pshat, Sheyehei kol ikar mara chilazon b'tzemer. So if this is my Mara Rishon, which everybody agrees is kosher, everybody with me on that? Anybody disagree? Tell me, it's okay. If this is Mara Sheni, and you need kol Mara chilazon b'tzemer, so what would you expect the Mara of Marasheni to look like? Again, Pashup Pshat, what do you think? It should be weaker, right? Is that what you would agree? I mean, again, I haven't done anything yet. So this is Pashup, right? Now we have a problem. My Marasheni, which is treif, unkosher, according to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, I got to tell you, it looks even better than my Mara Rishon. I didn't move anything. Okay, there's no sleight of hand here. They all saw it. What? Okay. Did you see anywhere in the Gemara about how long I had to leave it in? You said, you agreed to me a minute ago. Now you can't change your mind. This was kosher. And you said this was not kosher. And if we're talking about Mare, then we've got a big problem in the Shita of Rashi. Hold on to that for a few minutes because there's another Shita. What's the Shita of Tosfot? Tosfot says, no. Yes, it's true. That's what Rashi says. But that's not true. Not true according to Tosfot. Mishum shenemar klil techeles, perish bekuntris, shelo yeh davar acher tzavua ba mitchila, ve'afilu tzemer, ve'hu shkori marasheni sheba. Mashma de'im tzava ba shnei pa'amim ze achar ze pasul. What I did is pasul, according to Rashi. Afilu lishma, even if I did it for the sake of techeles, like I did. Tosfos is being made that Rashi held what Baruch Sterman did today is puzzle. Okay. Aval, let's go down a couple of lines. Tosfos doesn't agree to that, and he holds that Ela te'ima mishum dahavya shelo lishma. The whole problem with te'ima, of dipping the first time. Remember when we dipped just to have that test? What was the problem with that? That was a problem of lishma. It wasn't a problem of kol mare chilazon, what Rashi said. So therefore Tosfos says, mashma de kosher, after what does he say? Lechach tzarech lomar, de afilu mea pe'omim lishmo, mashma de kosher. Tosfos has a different shita than Rashi. Tosfos says, as long as you're doing it lishma, like I did, then it would be kosher. So again, Mararishon lishma, according to Rashi and Tosfot, beautiful. 100% kosher. Marasheni, not Marasheni really, because Tosfot doesn't hold what it is, but the second dip, lishma, according to Tosfot, 100% fine. According to Rashi, no good, because there's a problem according to Rashi. I'm going to skip Tosfot because we don't have a lot of time. But what I'm going to say, I'm going to move quickly now. I believe that the Rambam. I believe the Rambam holds just like Tosfot, because there's a lot to do here, but we have to move quickly. The Rashba asks a beautiful question. It's such a beautiful question. If Rashi holds that you need all of the koyach of the chilazon to be in the wool, right? So the Rashba asks, well, when you pour some out into the eggshell, you're pouring out some of the koyach of the chilazon. So that should also be no good. Why is it when you pour out some of the liquid that also has that chilazon in it, right? So why should that be okay? He gives a brilliant answer. The Rashba gives this answer. He says like this. In physics, in science in general, you give units, and you name units after some great scientist, right? Amperes or ohms or volts or whatever it is. So let's give units to the Rashi's koyach chilazon. I think that it's only fitting that we give them the units of Herzogs, after Rav Herzog, who wrote his doctorate on Tchilot. Now let's say you have a chilazon and it's got 100 Herzogs of power. And you put that into your vat. I've now got 100 Herzogs of chilazon power in my vat. Says the Rashba. Now, what's the Rashba's question? If I take some out and put it in a paper cup, now there's only 90 Herzogs. That's a psul. So the Rashba answers, no, your units are all wrong. It's not Herzogs. It's Herzogs per liter. Right? So now I've got in my vat, let's say I've got a liter of water, or you guys would call it a quart or a gallon or whatever you use here. So if I have 100 Herzogs per liter in 1 liter of liquid, and I pour out a few tenths of a liter into the paper cup, I still have 100 Herzogs per liter. That's the Rashba's answer. Beautiful answer. Beautiful question, beautiful answer. What it doesn't do is it doesn't help us understand Rashi. And exactly what I said here, and you'll look it up afterwards because I have all the Mar Makomos, this is precisely the Radziner of Gershon Henoch Leiner's understanding that the only possible way to understand Rashi, is Mar'eh. There's only one thing you could look at, that you could see, that you can measure, that you can care about if you're looking at a dye, and that is its color. So now there's a problem though, and Radziner knows this problem. The Radziner died with a DYE. Also died, but he also died. And so because he was a dyer, I'll say it that way, because he was a dyer, he understood the issues of dyeing. Rav Gershon Henoch Leiner, this is where I have it, and it's in bold. We're just going to jump to the bottom. And again, I hope everybody will read these to see that it really is an interesting question. And look at the bold, it's in the second paragraph. Rav Gershon Henachleiner, he writes about this in Pesil Tcheles. This is in the 1890s when he's writing this, about when he discovered his Tchelet. And we have arguments with the Radziner. We have arguments with him about his source, the Chilazon. But no one doubts that he understood the sugyas of Tcheles better than anybody ever in the world. And he writes in the bold, Haregam bitseva chama, in our dye, our hot dye, nire bechush, we see with our own senses, she'eino moshech v'kolei tatzeva b'pam harishona. It doesn't take everything out. It doesn't take all of the Herzogs of dye out of the vat in the first dip. Ve'afilu b'pam shniya v'shlishit, b'mara yafa v'chazaka, k'b'pam harishona. The second dip is exactly the same and sometimes even stronger than the first dip. You'll tell me I fooled you because I put one in long, one in the other, in not long. Okay, you're right. But nobody was standing with a stopwatch in the Gemara. V'lo hukcha marisa klal. There's not any damping. The second dip is not in any way less beautiful than the first. Ve'ein shayach lomar de lo havi klil techeles. So there is no way that you could claim in Rashi that this is not klil techeles. Therefore, the Radziner says very, very well. He says, according to Rashi, you have to make sure that you're getting a good, strong dye. If you've dipped once and the next one that comes out is already not so good, no good, not klil techeles. But if the next one that came out is pretty good, that's okay. And then if you dip again or again and again, the minute that it starts to fade, not to fade, but the minute that you start to see a more pale color of dye coming out, that's when you run into the problem of klil techeles. As far as Rashi is concerned, according to the Radziner. So now let's go back to Baruch Sterman's dye. The first one we hold is mutter 100% according to Rashi, according to Tosfa, according to everybody, because I died for the first time with all of the koach and mare of the chilazon. The second time I died, lishma, should be okay according to Tosfot. It should be certainly okay according to Yochanan ben Dahavai, who holds Mara Sheni is okay. And it should be okay according to Rashi, according to the Radziner's way of learning Rashi. So for all of those different shitot, all of those different ways, what I did here should be fine. But I can't leave you without some explanation. Tosfot didn't learn that way in Rashi. Nobody else ever learned that way in Rashi. Rav Gershon Henach is brilliant, but it's a big chiddush. Is there any other possible way to learn Rashi? What other psul could there be for using a second dip that Rashi could possibly be talking about? I think that the answer is very often in halacha. This is maybe I'll say a little bit of a chiddush of mine. You can accept it or not accept it, but I'll show you a nice little. I can't call it a proof, but it's cute. So there are many times in halacha, not many, but there are times in halacha that we need the first. Any examples? Shemen Zayis. Is there any difference molecularly between the first drop of Shemen Zayis or the second drop of Shemen Zayis? No. So why do we need the first? Zeres HaKossov. Bikurin. I have a fig tree. The first figs are not the best figs. So why not take the best figs 2, 3, 4 weeks later? Why do you need the first figs? There's many, many places where you need the first. And the reason is because the first has some kind of cover to it. And if you're going to hold that the issue of Rashi's understanding of dying the first time and only the first time has to do with cover, because we read in last week's parsha, what is the big day kahuna for? Chavod u'tfaret, right? Chavod u'tfaret. So if the issue is that it should be ra'ui, kavodik, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for the Melech Malchei Amlachim, the word klil that Rashi quotes, klil techeles, means klil kulo, all techeles, right? Is there another muvan? Is there another way that you could understand the word klil ever? Klil teferet b'rosho natata. What does that mean? Crown. Crown. It could mean that it's a crown. Could be that when Rashi is saying Kollel Techeles, Rashi is saying not that you need Kulo Techeles. That may be true. But maybe Rashi is saying Kollel Techeles. It means it's a crown. And a crown means that it's Bigdei Malchus. The king doesn't get leftovers. The king gets the first cut. And the first dip is Roy for the Melech Malchei Amlachim, and not the second dip. And I'm just going to say, and this I found just this past year, when the Baal Koreh was reading in Parshas Bamidbar, I went over to him afterwards and I said, you must have made a mistake. The trup can't be that way. Let's read together. There's 3 places in the Torah that it says the word Kollel Techeles. Two of them are by the Me'il. See something say Kollel Techeles. I'm going to excuse my voice, but I'm going to lay in for you. In Shmos, V'yasi sas Me'il ha'ifod Kollel Techeles. Okay, now I'm going to read from Bamidbar. V'nasnu Allah. What is the Kollel Techeles here talking about in Bamidbar? The kisui of the Aron, which was very strange because the kisui of the Aron was on top of the Or Tachash. The Or Tachash was like waterproof, right? It was plastic, let's call it, and it was very protective of whatever was underneath it. All of the when you're traveling in the Mishkan, you would put the Or Tachash on top of all of the of whatever it is that you were traveling to protect it from the dust, from the rain, who knows, right? But next to the Kli of the Beis HaMikdash, you would put beautiful Tcheles or Argaman. So you would have, let's say, for example, a menorah, and on top of the menorah, you'd have a beged, a cloth of Tcheles, which is kavadik, and then on top of that, you would have the Or Tachash, which protected it from the elements. By the Aron, you have the Or Tachash next to the Aron, and on top of that, you have the beged of Tcheles. Medrash talks about why. It says you have to look like the sky. Also gives another idea. Listen to that pasuk. Tell me the difference. V'nasnu alav kisui or tachash ufarsu beged Kollel Techeles milmala. What's the difference between the pasuk, the first and the second? One is Kollel Techeles. The other is beged Kollel, that's made out of Tcheles. How do you understand the trup? Okay, yeah. You'll tell me that it was only in the 7th, 8th century, the Seder, but still, somebody made the trup different. Why did they do it this way? The answer is, I think, because they're trying to tell you, why do you put this beged on the top? Because it's a beged Kollel. It's the crowning beged. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Very nice. Now let's move on to the Metzius. Professor Tzvi Koren has argued that it would have been impossible to have Tcheles sky blue in the daytime. He argues, and you could read his tradition articles or his Tchumen articles or his articles in other places, and his claim is that this method couldn't have been done in the ancient times. Beseder, whether that's true or not, I know for sure it's true because I use modern chemicals. But as I mentioned, and if you want, you can go to the article in Tchumen by Rabbi Professor Ari Zivotofsky, where we talk about 7 different ways that you can make sky blue out of the murex. Many of those were available to the ancients, many weren't, and I don't have enough time to really go into it, but I just want to talk about one particular method that Professor Koren agrees would have been available to the ancients, but it would have been puzzle to do. Here are 3 dips, meaning I have 1 vat of dye. I dipped the first time, without sunlight. I didn't use my flashlight. In the absolute pitch dark, I dipped the first time. Remember what I told you were going to get? Purple, right? Okay, and that's what I get. The first time you dip in the vat, you're going to get purple, again, assuming that you're in the dark. The second time you dip with a new piece of wool, you're going to get this color. I know you're far away, so you'll tell me. What color is this?
Darker blue.
It's blue. Okay? The second time you dip, and Professor Koren accepts that fact. This is a fact. The second time you dip with a new piece of wool, you're going to get blue, and I was able to get sky blue. The third time, you're going to get a really, really light sky blue. Now, I believe if you understand the sugya of Mara Sheni, now things become very, very, very difficult. If you say that the first dip gives you a different color than the second dip, then I think the whole sugya falls apart. Are you with me on this? Do you agree?
Do you mean the second time in the dark?
No. Yeah. Second time in the dark, no sunlight. The second time in the dark, if you take the same vat and dip a second time, you're going to get blue. Meaning that in the ancient world, it probably took you about 2, 3, 4 months to set up a vat. You have to go collect the snails. You have to get it to the point where it's reduced. Very, very, very difficult. So then you dye with it. And what comes out of here is worth 20 times its weight in gold. Okay? So the first dip, now I have wool that I am going to take to the marketplace and get 20 times its weight in gold for. So now I'm going to throw out all of my 2 months of work so that I can get the next vat, Mara Rishon, according to Rashi. No one's going to do that. And again, we're talking about the Romans here, not necessarily the Jews. Of course I'm going to dip a second time with a new bunch of wool, and a third time, and a fourth time, and like Tosa says, afilu mea pa'amim. And whatever I have, I'm going to sell. Maybe not for 20 times its weight in gold, maybe for 15 times its weight in gold, for 10, or for whatever it is. I'm going to constantly be dipping. Not only that, but archaeologists are telling us now that they believe that the vat would be kept going for weeks and maybe months. Meaning, I bring my vat to this reduced state, I dip, and I get whatever I get, purple, blue, whatever I get. And then I dip again, and I get something else which is also expensive. And then I dip again and again and again, and now it starts to turn very, very weak. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a new batch of snails and throw them into the old vat. It's like sourdough yeast. It's already most of the way there. It's a primer. It starts things off. And then I'll continue to dip. So if you say that that's no good, according to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, then that's a very, very huge chiddush. It's not a chiddush, it's a chumrah. It's a very, very difficult chumrah. What Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel is saying, no, chas v'shalom, you can't do it. You have to, again, unless you talk about Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel according to Tosfot. According to Tosfot, everything would be fine, because I'm constantly, the Romans are dipping their things, we're dipping our things, we've got a different vat going, and I keep on topping off the vat with new snails, but each time I dip my wool, it's lishma, afilu mea pa'amim, it's all good. So Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, who holds that Mara Sheni is possible, but this is not Mara Sheni, it's all lishma, everything is wonderful and good. But according to Rashi, or at least according to the way, if you're not the Radziner, according to the simple way of reading Rashi, that you can only dip once and then you have to throw it out, according to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, that is a huge, huge chumrah. And you can understand where Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavai comes along and says, Ushni tolas Yaakov. We're not that rich, Rabbi Chanina. We need, you want people to wear tcheles. It's a very, very difficult and very expensive thing. If you want everybody to wear first dip tcheles, you're going to have 5 people, probably from your family, the Gamliel family, wearing tcheles, and nobody else is going to be able to afford it. Yochanan ben Davai is saying the Jews are not able, this is something that we can't accept. Mara Sheni Shabbat has to be kosher, or else nobody's going to be able to wear tcheles. It'll be so astronomical, so impossible. It's a possibility that that's what the machlokes, or part of the machlokes, is about. But one thing is sure, and this is what I would really like to leave you with. If what's true, which I think it is true, again, this is science, it's not made up, if you dip, and this has been done, if you dip the first time and you get purple, and you dip the second time and you get blue, there's only two possibilities. At least the way I understand the sugya, and I hope that you'll really go home and look it over and see if you agree with me. One of two things has to be. Because I can't believe that the machlokes between Rashi and Tosfot is on whether or not the color is allowed to be blue or only purple. Rashi would have said something like that. Tosfot, when he says, afilu mea pam, the whole 99 of those mea pamim is going to be sky blue, according to everybody. So either you have to say that if it comes out a little bit purple or it comes out a little bit blue, they're both kosher for tcheles. Or there was some method. Maybe Professor Koren says that our method couldn't have been that method, but there are other methods that could have been done. Instead of using sodium dithionite, you could have used lime. We've done that also, and fructose. It's another method. There are people in Lakewood, Yisrael Barkin, who tried to do it with a certain different method. There's people in Eretz Yisrael who have done that with different methods and have been able to achieve blue. So maybe you have to say, which is another possibility, that even the first dip in the Gemara, according to Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, I don't know how he did it, but you'd have to say that the first dip also came out sky blue. In any event, what I wanted to show from all of this is that the mixture together of understanding the metzius of how things actually work sheds light on the sugya, and the sugya can shed light, once you understand the metzius, the sugya can shed light on unraveling mysteries that are 1,000 and 2,000 and more years old. If you take the sugya seriously, and you understand that what it's trying to tell you is it's trying to tell you something about the nature of how they actually died tcheles. This has important, profound implications for us today. One of the questions that I asked the Rosh Hashiva, and he told me to ask everybody else, and I'd love it if we could get some people to write papers on it. L'halacha, should we try to be machmir according to Rashi, according to the way Tosfot understood Rashi, and should we be machmir and try only to use Mara Rishon according to Rashi, or should we say, why should you be machmir? You can have a psak halacha here. If you had a machloket where the Rambam and Tosfot are on one side and Rashi is on the other side, so maybe you would paskin according to Tosfot in that case. And if so, can we at P'til Tchelet, when we make our tcheles, do we need to be makbid according to the shita of Rashi, which we do today, or could we maybe bring the price down, which is also important, by not being so makbid and being and allowing for the shita of Tosfot? All of these are important questions. Once again, I thank you all for inviting me to speak here. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to.
What do you mean you're makbid for Rashi today?
We make a vat. We dip our threads or our wool in the vat. We take it out and we throw away the vat. We won't dip new wool into the vat that was used previously, even though the first dipping was lishma. So according to Tosfot, I should have no problem taking new strings or new wool and dipping it into the same vat. We don't do that. We're machmir and we throw away the.
Second time and third time you have the same color.
You tell me.
Yes, so why can't you read the Rashi? Rashi means that the Rashi calls the color ikamara chalazim. As long as you have that main color, that's called the first time.
That's what the Radziner Rebbe said. Seems that he argued with Tosfot though. Tosfot doesn't hold that way in Rashi. It's a problem.
The last point that it has to be either one or two, that we accept bluish purple.
Yep.
That means we're assuming that they didn't use any sunlight.
Maybe they did. I'm assuming that if they had to do something, I don't know what it was. It could have used something.
The Ma'ar Rishon could just be.
Could have been blue.
Could
Yes.
have just been blue.
Yes.
By putting it in sunlight.
Yes.
That'd be the other method.
That would right. It's one of the 7 methods is to use sunlight. There are other methods that use sunlight or use